You are welcome once again. Now, let's look at what you need to put into consideration before selecting a site for a farmstead. The very first question to ask or answer is how much land is needed. Number two, is there any fencing requirement? Because of security, probably the nature of what the enterprise want to start with may not necessarily require fencing, but we have seen clearly that fencing is essential because of these agro-pastoralists that are moving about with their cow, the herdsmen. It doesn't have to be a hard fence. It could just be a live fence by way of planting trees around the entire farmstead, or erecting short poles with barbed wire so that stray animals will not enter into the field to eat all the crops that are growing. Because a farmstead can be really large. That it may not be adequately covered by security. So you must put certain things in place that will prevent all these stray animals, and you know that there has always been these farmer herders clashes all over the place. So fencing requirement. At what stage do you need to fence the entire farmstead? You need to determine that. Another issue that is required, particularly if you want to carry out what we call gardening in the farmstead. That's production of vegetables and flowers. In Africa, we don't value flowers, but in countries like Netherlands, flowers is a high money spinning income. All over the Western world, they use flowers to decorate the house. They don't make use of artificial room deodorant. They make use of flowers, fresh flowers. So on a regular basis, they go to the flower shop to buy flowers, making millions of dollars out of flowers, fresh flowers. Israel produces flowers to supply to Europe. The flowers produce very excellent aroma or odor that remove terrible odor. So if it's gardening, growing of vegetables, for livestock production, the feed and the housing is the most important parameter, because the livestock have to be housed. So when you are selecting a site, you have to consider whether you are located not too far away from the source of feed, and then to ensure that appropriate housing is constructed for them. Another important consideration is if the enterprise is for crop production, then you need the agricultural land, the fields where the crops will be planted. There's definitely going to be conservation needs, otherwise erosion can take the larger chunk of the soil fertility that is there. And then you need to also determine whether there will be need for irrigation. That's if you are not going to be dependent on rain-fed agriculture alone. And if we are going to feed ourselves in this country, we have to be ready to produce crops throughout the year, an essential component of food security. Another consideration in selecting a site is the issue of wildlife. Is there going to be hunting or a game reserve? These are advanced needs. So there are farmsteads that are planned to also house some wildlife also, so that at least people can come to that farm estate to carry out hunting if it is permitted. You have to get a license for that. And so ordinarily, wild animals are kept in nature reserves or wildlife parks. But in this part of the world, you know that the love for wildlife is basically for eating and not for conservation purposes. So you have a lot of hunting taking place, bush rats, what do you call it, grass cutter, deer, all those games that are killed by hunters. Another important consideration is whether there's going to be recreation on the farm. A farm is a good place to relax. There are some farm estates that have hotel accommodation, that have facilities. So if you just want to relax, or you want to rest, or you want to do certain assignment that does not require disturbance, people leave the urban areas to go to farm settlements where there are less population and then less noise. And then it could also be for tourism. All right. Another consideration for site selection is whether there's going to be crop processing. This processing of crops has its needs. So crop processing needs may be essential. For example, when you grow cereals, for example, that's maize, barley, all those grain crops are generally known as cereals. When you grow them, you need to harvest them and process them. If you plant maize, you have to shell the maize so that you can have the corn out of the maize cob. Otherwise, you will not be able to store in large quantities. So there are structures that are used to store grains. There are also traditional structures that are used to store the maize while it is still in the cobs. But storage requirement is very essential. When you are going to carry out crop processing, you are going to need crop processing machines. You are going to need the mills. Maybe you want to process the dry corn into corn flour. You need the hammer mills. You need the escalators, that's the conveyors, whether it is bucket conveyor or pneumatic conveyor. You need all those facilities. You need the mixers where you need to mix. If it is feed mill, you need to mix a lot of materials together to constitute or compose a feed. So what are the needs that you will have depends on the activity, processing activity you want to carry out, particularly if you want to do value addition to the crops. Then every farmstead needs buildings and infrastructures. In terms of buildings, this is where you look at the living quarters, the livestock buildings and pens, the roads network on the farm. You must demarcate particular portion for equipment to pass. Either they are going for a planting operation, a tending operation. There must be a means by which they will come. There must be workshop. There must be implement shed where the equipment are preserved from the vagaries of the weather, and then where quick repairs are carried out. It is only repairs that cannot be handled on the farm that will be taken out to maybe a mechanical workshop somewhere. So there is it's essential to plan for roads, access road, because there must be a means of evacuating the produce from the farm, as well as planning for other utilities. Those are things you have to consider. Utilities like source of water. Water is essential for agriculture, whether for consumption by animals in their stables or for irrigation purpose. You may need an earth dam to be able to impound enough water to irrigate entire land. A single farm can be up to 10,000 hectares of land. That's quite a lot. You can imagine a football field is 1 hectare. When you now have 10,000 football fields, that's quite a lot of land. And so a means of irrigating such large expanse of land is very important. Electricity. You need electricity to run some machines on the farm. So if there's a power grid in the area, you need to plan to tap that power grid or probably isolate your power source and provide generators or make use of renewable energies that have been used in advanced countries like solar power, or using a wind turbine to harness the wind turbine. There's also some other utilities that are essential, like waste management. How do you manage the waste? Some people say waste is wealth. Of course, you can make money out of the waste. All the slurries that are generated from the livestock housing, how do you handle them? You can allow them to ferment and use them as organic fertilizer on the farm again, instead of buying artificial fertilizer which are inorganic in nature and damage the soil. You can have livestock on one side. That livestock can provide organic manure for the crop farm that is also there on the farm. So ability to manage this waste so that there will be no generation of odors are very essential. Now, what are the necessary factors that you must consider, the important factors now that you must consider in the selection of a site for a farmstead? Number one is drainage. Drainage, you have it already in the note. There must be no ponding of water on the farm except in the maybe earth pond that you construct, or fish pond that you construct for the purpose, or a reservoir that you use to impound water. So the farm must be well drained, the farmland must be well drained, especially in the rainy season and after irrigation runs. So as you are applying the water, the excess water must be moved away. So there is a need for there to be drainage system on the farm. Waste management system must be in place. You must be able to take care of all the waste that is generated. For example, like the crop residue after harvest, what do you do with it? In some places, they just burn them off. But today, they can be used to generate energy, which can be used, for other purposes. For example, there are farms now that are adopting biogas. You can generate biogas from waste from animals, such that in your quarters or the hotel associated with the farm, you have a biogas digester which produces the gas that provides heating. And for any other industrial activities that may require heat, like boiling. For example, you want to process rice, you have to parboil it. So you need heating the water to a specified temperature. So it's very essential to be able to manage all the waste that is generated. The various crop residues are also feed for animals. You can bale them and put them in storage for use in the dry season to feed the animal, because depending on the location where you are, if you are in the savannah, dry season is prolonged, so there is no grazing location except grazing plots that are sustained by irrigation, that where the animals will see green plant materials to eat. So most of the time, you can store some of these crop residues. Water, source of water, is very essential. There must be availability of water on the farm for activities, for drinking, for industrial processes, for the animals, if you are going to run a livestock farm. So water is very important. I mentioned the other time the issue of utilities. Telephone, the means of communication, electrical services, they are essential. Transportation system. The farm must not be so isolated that workers will not be able to go. And even if there are quotas, once in a while, the workers will want to go to the city or go to the nearest well-built locations to get some things that may not be available on the farm. There must be proper road network, as I mentioned earlier. Then number 5 is the orientation of the buildings. Agricultural buildings require orientation in such a manner that you must consider the direction of the wind in orienting such buildings. So it's very essential for you to know that. And then in planning for a farmstead, you need to put consideration for expansion, future expansion. You cannot maximize the land without putting in place development in phases. So your planning must put into mind the need for future expansion, because you may not start all the agricultural ventures at the same time. You may be adding them bit by bit. Now, let's look at the issue of agricultural building arrangement. You see it in section 1.2 of the note. Agricultural buildings are not just built and arranged anyhow. Buildings are arranged for efficiency. For example, you cannot site animal stables near residential quarters because of the noise, number one, because of the odor that will be generated from the physics of the animals. So living quarters cannot be sited near the livestock pens. And that's the reason in every farmstead, the livestock pens are usually established further away from the central area. The workshop must be sited in such a way that it is close to the implement shed, and a store must be nearby. Likewise, also, the storage system where you store the crops that have been harvested must be located in close proximity to the processing building. That's the processing factory that you have set up, so that at least you can move bulk material from the store straight to the mill where it will be processed into other products. So it's very essential for agricultural buildings to be arranged appropriately. There is figure 1 that shows a typical farm layout, which shows different zones that can be used. In zone 1, you have the family living quarters at the center, which is the central area of the farm. In zone 2, you have machinery center that can easily be accessed from your quarters. You just go to the machinery center. The tractor operators will just move there. And then in the third zone, you have grains and feed and maybe some livestock that probably do not generate much noise. And then in zone 4, you have major livestock. These ones are in large quantities and they are occupying larger spaces. And so the last zone there is the waste management zone. So you can see that where the waste is being managed is the farthest away from the living quarters, which is the family living area, where you have residential quarters for the farm manager, for the supervisors, for the attendants, for all tractor operators, engineering staff, workshop staff, technical staff, the account department. I'm talking of a well-established farm business organization. Agriculture is a business now, and there is big business all over the world. You all know what the consequence of the war in Ukraine has done to us, the cost of food material, because it has affected the agricultural system of that country. And so the world supply of grains has been hampered, and that is why bread is expensive. That is why poultry feed is expensive, and every other thing, materials that are used from those grains, whether wheat, whether maize, whether even sunflower, they are all expensive now. And then in section 1.3 talks about planning for farm buildings. What are the things that makes building investment beneficial? Farm buildings offer a lot of benefits, because once you have them in place, you can apply them or deploy them for use. Number one is that it provides facilities for efficient operation. That's a very important objective of having a building on the farm. It must provide facilities that can be used for various activities, and those facilities must be efficient. Then number two is that an environment. The environment that a building provides is the ambience that you have. When you are inside a building, for example, you know how comfortable you become. The air is cool, especially on a hot afternoon, compared to when you are walking in the field, in the sun. So it provides a conducive environment for staff and even the livestock apart from that, provides the appropriate sanitary condition. Number 3 is that it provides, farm buildings also provide conditions that are suitable for production. For example, look at a factory where processing is done. Factories are usually built to be high. Some factories can be as high as tall as a story building because of the kind of equipment that are installed there and the height of the various operations that goes on there. So they must provide, building must provide a comfortable environment that is suitable for production. Next is that a building, an agricultural building, provide comfortable surroundings for both livestock and workers. That one is very essential. And then the issue of safety. Agricultural buildings provide safety, not just for livestock. It's good for the livestock to be in one place, not that they are just roaming around all over the place. They must be in their pen. They eat their food in the pen. And particularly the cattle that is grown for beef, they have to be kept in their pens so that at least there can be higher productivity. It's also essential, as I round off, that for me to tell you that some photographs of different livestock housing, different housing structures or buildings that we have on farms. This one is just minimal. Just for example, you can Google the rest. There are several types of buildings that are used on the livestock. You have the livestock pen. You have a poultry house, for example. It's constructed in such a special way that there must be aeration. If aeration is low, the poultry birds will die. There must be farm workshop. A typical example is shown in the note. It must be high enough for heavy equipment to maneuver in it, be repaired, and then there must be sheds for implements. Field implements must have a shed. We have greenhouses. A greenhouse, the picture is also there. You have a typical example of a field where crops are grown, well laid out on a very large expanse of land. And then you have farm storage. You have silos. You have barns that are used to store, or even warehouses that are used to store bulk grain materials as well as other materials. You have irrigation structures. You have an head dam, which is used for impounding reservoir. You have farm roads. Most of the time, farm roads are usually stone-based roads. And then you have farmhouses in the note. So the next module, you will get the video very soon. Is there any question?